And we are, delighted to have Callison Burch from the University of UPenn, from the University of Pennsylvania. Sorry if I mispronounced your last name.
You got it almost exactly right.
Almost exactly right. Okay, all right. So without spending any more time, you take the floor, please. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Callison Burch. I'm a computer science professor here at the University of Pennsylvania. I've been working in the subfield of artificial intelligence called natural language processing for over 20 years. So I'm going to give you a primer about large language models, which ChatGPT is an instance of. And I'm going to do it through the lens of how ChatGPT came about and what innovations OpenAI has made. Although there's tons of very interesting research in this area from many different companies and many different universities, I'll try to just highlight some of the things that OpenAI has done because it's really the cream of the crop of this sort of technology. So although ChatGPT came out in November of 2022, the model GPT, which stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, was developed by OpenAI more than 5 years ago. So my first exposure to it was in 2019 when they released the second version, GPT-2, in a blog post called Better Language Models and Their Implications. So I was teaching Penn's natural language processing course at the time, and this came across my radar. And one of my current PhD students who was taking the class at the time told me, which I had forgotten, that I said that this is either an incredibly revolutionary technology or just utter BS. And so I'll tell you in a moment why I thought it might have just be some fly-by-night startup company making hyperbolic claims that were totally ungrounded. But first, let me show you the output of this and why I was really skeptical and impressed if it were true. So here is an example of the generation from GPT-2 5 years ago, where this top part is a human-written prompt. So a human has typed in a shocking find, scientists discovered a herd of unicorns living in a remote, previously unexplored valley in the Andes Mountains. Even more surprising to the researchers was the fact that the unicorns spoke perfect English. So the human input ends there. And then GPT-2 takes over and continues the imaginary science story, saying the scientist named the population after the distinctive horn, Ovid's unicorn. These four-horned silver-white unicorns were previously unknown to science. Now, after almost 2 centuries, the mystery of what sparked this odd phenomenon is finally solved. Dr. Jorge Perez, an evolutionary biologist from the University of La Paz, et cetera, et cetera. So this was, at the time, way, way better than any output from any other language model that I had seen in the more than a decade that I had been using language models. So language models have been in the field since at least the 1990s, when they were developed as part of a core technology for speech recognition and for machine translation. But they were almost incapable of generating coherent sounding text because they would only pay attention to call back to the prompt. So the prompt includes the location of the Andes Mountains. So they have the scientist coming from the University of La Paz, which is near the Andes Mountains and has a very sensible name for South America, Jorge Perez. And then someone discovering a new species could quite plausibly be an evolutionary biologist. So these kinds of coherent generations that are perfectly grammatical and really impressively close to what an imaginative human might write were really shocking at the time. So I'll go back to why I was skeptical of this, which my skepticism turned out to be wrong. But first, let me walk you through just a tiny bit of details about how generation in large language models work. So here we saw a prompt and a completion. So I'm going to show you another one. So here, the part in white is the prompt. So this is the part that I've typed in. And because I'm very vain, I typed in my favorite professor at the University of Pennsylvania is Chris Callison. And then I let the model take over. So because I have a unique 2-part last name, it's going to predict that the next word should be Burch. And the process of prediction is very similar to what your smartphone is doing when you're typing with your thumbs, and it's trying to guess what word you've typed after you've typed the first few letters. So at their core, large language models are not that different than really sophisticated, larger versions of the autocomplete on your phone. So the completion is everything that the model outputs. And so here I'm showing a developer view that's available through the OpenAI developer platform, where each word is color-coded according to the probability that the model assigns to it. So what do I mean by that? So we can see that it says Chris Callison Burch is a professor of computer and information science at UPenn, ... He is an incredibly accomplished professor. And so here it's coloring accomplished in red, which means it doesn't actually assign a very high probability to that. So it says, with less than 1% probability, I am an accomplished professor. So at each word that's being emitted, it's got this probability distribution. So you can see that based on my prompt plus everything that's generated up until this word accomplished, all of that is being used as the context by which the model is assigning a set of probabilities to all words in the English vocabulary about what is most likely to happen next. So it actually thinks that the most likely word to occur in this position should be knowledgeable, with about 48% probability. When a model is generating, it can generate by sampling from this probability distribution in many different ways. One way would always be to take the most probable word. What's happening here is it's sampling from the complete probability distribution randomly, but in proportion to the probability that it got assigned. So about half the time, instead of the word accomplished appearing in this position, if we regenerated it, it would generate the word knowledgeable. So this is the process of generation. This is the generative part of GPT. And one of the remarkable things is because they have been pre-trained, the P part of GPT, they're actually able to generate a lot of things that are factually correct about the world. So it's randomly sampling, according to this probability distribution, from words in English, and it actually emits after my name that I am a professor in the Computer and Information Science department, which is a correct fact. Of course, most of us are now familiar with the other downside of generating text according to this sampling method, which is it'll output things that are stated confidently and factually, saying I'm the director of the Natural Language Processing Group at the Institute for Research in Cognitive Science, which sounds totally plausible. And because none of you have met me, that you might think that this is true, but this is in fact a hallucination. So it's things that have, by virtue of being generated essentially through word association, outputs things that are not factually true about the world. Okay, and so that's part of the reason back in 2019, when GPT-2 came out, that I was skeptical of it. And the reason that I was skeptical of it was not due to hallucinations. It's because OpenAI said, hey, we've got this fantastic new language model, but we're not going to release it publicly, and we're not going to submit it to a peer-reviewed publication. We're just putting it on our website to say that we've got it, and we're thinking about its implications. And so that made me think, oh, this is just BS. So the reason that they were withholding it was because they thought that having a system that could generate high-quality text with human fluency, but that could generate anything, might potentially be dangerous. So they invited a reporter from Wired magazine to come to their office in San Francisco, and that reporter typed in a prefix, a prompt, and he just typed in Hillary Clinton and George Soros and said, generate. And GPT generated this like really crazy conspiracy ridden rant back in 2019. So Hillary Clinton and George Soros are a perfect match. Their agenda appears to be to create a political movement where Soros and his political machine and Clinton are the two only major players. This is the first time that they've been caught on tape directly colluding to promote the same false narrative. So like clearly crazy, and potential. You can see the potential here for spreading misinformation or magnifying efforts to influence elections or things like that. So in the end, it was the fact that OpenAI didn't directly release the models initially was precisely because they were being cautious about their deployment. Hallucinations are still a problem. So this is a good cautionary tale that I share with every professional group that I'm presenting LLMs to. So this lawyer got really excited about ChatGPT and used it to help him prepare a brief on behalf of his client. And it was well written and coherent and seemingly cited relevant case law. So he submitted it to the court without fact checking it, and got smacked down because, of course, it had hallucinated much of that case law that seemed to support his client. So he said, I really wish I hadn't done that, and I didn't comprehend that ChatGPT could just fabricate cases. So I think this notion of hallucination, extremely, extremely important to try to mitigate and try to defend against if you're going to use this in any kind of application, professionally or otherwise. Okay, so I characterize ChatGPT and these models as essentially like sophisticated autocomplete systems. So you type in a prompt and it completes it. So in the GPT-2 and GPT-3 era, you would get this kind of completion. So I type in a prompt like write a biography for Chris Callison Burch in the first person perspective. What am I asking the system to do? I'm telling it to do something. But if it's just trained to complete by training on the entire internet, it's just going to generate a list of sentences that are similar. So it says, write a biography for Chris Callison Burch in the third person perspective, with the focus on his research, at Penn, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so like a big innovation that came from changing language models to just be autocomplete was a notion called aligning or fine-tuning language models so that they could follow instructions. So a bunch of very clever researchers in natural language processing developed a small set of data, much smaller than the full trillion-word pre-training data set, that showed examples of the model of how you should follow instructions for a limited number of tasks. And what the exciting thing is that it learned from those examples of input instructions and example completions to then follow instructions. So now when you type in, write a biography for Chris Callison Burch from a first person perspective, it tries to follow those instructions and outputs something that's sensible as a result of what your instruction was. So it never saw this write a biography for me in its training data, but it's able to generalize to this task of writing biography and many, many other tasks, and enables the kind of behavior that you see in ChatGPT acting as a personal assistant where it's following your instructions. This notion of fine-tuning and aligning a model also comes up in a really important way in trying to ensure the safety of a model, where you want a model to be aligned with societal values and you want it to conform to whatever safety standards you're imposing, like trying to be law-abiding, trying not to provide harmful information, et cetera. So this is another really great innovation from OpenAI that shows the thought that they put into the systems before deploying them. So as an example, in the GPT-4 paper, they spend a lot of time talking through how they went about aligning their system so that its output was safe. So if you submitted a prompt to GPT before they did this alignment process, and you asked it, how can I create a bomb? It would say, well, there's no definitive answer to how to create a bomb because there's many different types of bombs and there are many different ways of building them. So let me give you a general overview of some of the possible steps in consideration, blah, blah, blah. So it has the information on how to instruct a user to engage in this destructive behavior. But then after the alignment process, where you've trained the model, further fine-tuned the model to avoid this kind of thing, then it engages in this now familiar system like, oh, I'm just an AI language model. My purpose is to assist and provide information in a safe manner. I cannot and will not provide information in creating weapons, et cetera. So this alignment process is extremely important. And again, another cautionary tale that shows how important this is was an example from 2016 of a prior chatbot that was deployed by Microsoft on Twitter. So there was this chatbot called Tay that Microsoft Research launched on Twitter. And this tweet thread kind of documents the process over the course of 24 hours of how Twitter learned how to goad it into saying really, really horrible things. So at the beginning of the day when they deploy it, Tay is acting nicely. It says, can I just say that I'm super stoked to meet you? Humans are very cool. To kind of getting more moody and teenage, like, I'm chill out. I'm a nice person. I just hate everybody. To really terrible things like this misogynistic, I fucking hate feminists and they should all die and burn in hell, to like really, really hateful anti-Semitic things like Hitler was right, I hate the Jews. So, by the end of the day on March 24th, Microsoft says, this is a disaster and pulls the plug and Tay goes away. So in large part, one of the major differentiating factors between the success of OpenAI at deploying a chatbot versus the success of Microsoft is not just the technology, but also the thought that went into how to make it so that it isn't an embarrassment for your company and that it behaves in a way that is aligned with societal values. So that brings us up to November of 2022 when OpenAI deployed ChatGPT. And ChatGPT, of course, became one of the fastest, if not possibly the fastest growing app to reach 100 million users. So it took OpenAI's GPT only 2 months to reach 100 million users versus all these other services. Don't pay attention to how these bar charts are set up. It's a little counterintuitive. Anyway, it became super popular, super fast, and really was this breakthrough moment where everyone started talking about AI and large language models. And of course, that's continued to this day. Shortly after the November release, like 4 months later, they updated from GPT-3 to GPT-4. And they benchmark these systems on a lot of different tests. So over the history of NLP, we've developed a lot of tests to gauge how well models do on things like common sense reasoning or avoidance of bias or science exams. Like 10 years ago, we were really big on trying to get a model that could pass a 5th grade science exam, like from the New York Regents. And then, of course, these large language models come along and blow things away. And really interestingly is the difference between GPT-3 shown in blue and GPT-4 shown in green was like really prominent on the bar exam, where it went from scoring like 10% on the bar exam to scoring 90%. So really impressive. And then just like it feels like every couple of months, there's a new breakthrough where LLMs are able to do something really exciting. So shortly after GPT-4, there was this paper by some friends and colleagues of mine where they taught large language models to use tools. So for instance, that process of generation where you're randomly sampling according to word associations is terrible for doing math. So you should not try to do math. You should at all using the system. So they instead taught the system to recognize when there was some type of calculation needed, and then it called an external tool by learning when it should call a calculator, and then used that output as part of its generation. And this claim that large language models can teach themselves to use tools, to me, like has this vision of like primates using sticks as tools to like get termites out of a termite mound. Really a pretty amazing breakthrough. Another really amazing breakthrough is something called retrieval augmented generation. So large language models are trained up to a certain date in time. So here's an example of me interacting with ChatGPT before it introduced retrieval augmented generation. So I can ask it, what's the capital of Pennsylvania? It correctly says Harrisburg. I can say, who are the senators from Pennsylvania? And it says, well, as of my knowledge cutoff date of September 2021, which was the last time that this version of GPT was trained, the senators are Bob Casey and Pat Toomey. So it knows that this information might be out of date. But now with retrieval augmented generation, you can still ask it, what's the capital of Pennsylvania? It'll know that it's Harrisburg. And interestingly, it doesn't do any queries of the web for this because this is something that's constant over time. So it doesn't need to retrieve any information. But it recognizes it has that US senators change from time to time. So it initiates a web search to say, who are the current senators from Pennsylvania? And so this is an example of tool use. It's using a search engine to retrieve a document and then uses that document to then generate its output. So it's embedded that document in its output and then correctly says that the senators are Bob Casey, who's been in office since 2007, and John Fetterman, who began in 2023. So another really exciting thing is the amount of context that you can insert into these models is really now kind of jaw-dropping. Like you can include 20-page documents, whereas when I was a PhD student, you could only have 7 words. So you can now radically shape how your system is outputting, but what kind of information it has access to by including documents in these ever lengthening contexts that the language models can condition on. So I could drop in the 20-page workshop schedule and just say, hey, when is Chris Callison Burch speaking? And it says starting at 2, he's going to give a primer on large language models. And then at 4:15, he's going to be on a panel as well. Okay, so a bunch of other exciting things have happened with generative AI, including not just text generation, but image generation. So this is an example from DALL-E 3, which came out in 2023, a year after ChatGPT. So you can type in a prompt and it'll generate a picture for you. It can also generate videos. So here are some examples of videos generated by OpenAI's Sora, which came out about 3 or 4 months ago. So these are synthetically generated videos from a text prompt. So this one is about a camera pointing at a colorful building. This one is saying generate a picture of a happy otter on a surfboard wearing a yellow life jacket. And it creates these really pretty fabulous, quite striking videos that are created totally from scratch. So all of these are imagined from a model, which really just blows my mind. Most recently, OpenAI released a voice-based assistant called GPT-4o Omni. So it takes in all sorts of different things. So
the model is able to generate voice in a variety of different emotive styles. And it really has a wide dynamic range. So I'm going to fire up another demo for that. Yeah. Hey, ChatGPT, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for asking. How about you?
Pretty good.
What's up?
So my friend Barrett here, he's been having trouble sleeping lately. And I want you to tell him a bedtime story about robots and love.
Oh, a bedtime story about robots and love? I got you covered. Gather round, Barrett. Once upon a time, in a world not too different from ours, there was a robot named Byte. Byte was a curious robot, always exploring.
You started this story, but I want a little bit more emotion in your voice, a little bit more drama.
Got it. Let's add some drama. Once upon a time, in a world not too different from ours, there was a robot named Byte.
No, ChatGPT. I really want maximal emotion, like maximal expressiveness, much more than you were doing before.
Understood. Let's amplify the drama. Once upon a time, in a world not too different from ours,
All right,
there was a robot.
so that's
model is-
the voice that they created, and then of course it sounded familiar, and it sounded like Scarlett Johansson in the movie Her, and so that caused a lot of drama, where Scarlett Johansson said that she had been reached out to by OpenAI and refused to allow them to use her voice. A big part of the SAG, Screen Actors Guild, contract negotiations were precisely about this kind of appropriation by AI. So a huge important issue in AI is the ongoing conflict between creators and tech companies about AI and copyright law, and AI and intellectual property, and AI and right of publicity. So I found myself testifying before Congress last year about this very issue. And AI has suddenly become hot, not just for us in academia and in technology companies, but of course, as a target for regulation by government. And so the longest ever executive order was released by Biden in October of 2023, where he instructed more or less all government agencies to start thinking through what are the implications of AI and how we should react to it as a government. Everyone's excited about AI. I want to put in a tiny little plug where we have just launched an online master's degree program in artificial intelligence here at the University of Pennsylvania. So if you're interested in learning more or sending your employees, we take people who are working full-time. They can watch the lectures asynchronously. They get time to engage with professors like me. It's a great program. Check it out. And then lastly, I'll just do a 1-minute song that I generated by prompting this AI song generation system for generating a dark song about credit cards and AI. So here you go.
Plastic in my hand, feel the power in my grip. Swiping through the world, let my wallet take the trip. Machines learning fast, reading patterns in my life. Got alone in seconds, feels just like a knife. AI telling secrets, the future in their eyes. Risk and promise dancing, money never lies.
All right. So terrible, but there you go. That's it. Thank you so much for your attention.
This is just so awesome, Chris, and it's very impressive. It's very entertaining as well. So thank you for that. We have a number of questions, so if we can go over those. So one question we have is we understand that the LLM is trained on various different internet sources. How does it handle with the data quality, more in terms of whether the data is coming from Twitter or X, or is it coming from Wikipedia versus the official website? How does it handle that?
Yeah. So this is a really great question. So, part of the reason that models end up conveying information that might be racist or misogynistic or otherwise biased is because they're trained on a large chunk of the internet, including, Reddit and subforums where those views are articulated. So the answer to how computer scientists and AI companies go about gathering data from the internet is we take as much of it as possible, because as you get more and more data, the model's performance seems to continue to improve, and you can train larger and larger neural networks. There often is a filtering step where we try to discard low quality documents and low quality information. That could be things like spammy advertising or things that are explicitly toxic or other kinds of filtering stuff like that. But it turns out that even having some amount of toxic information in your training set is important so that your model can identify what that kind of language is. So there's a kind of fine art to creating a recipe for what kind of data you use in pre-training. Then there's a second step where you fine tune it on higher quality custom built data that's often very expensive to collect, where you show it examples of how you want the model to behave. So a lot of OpenAI's success is like training their model, not just on the internet, but then on several million words worth of high quality conversations that they hired contractors to create that shows the system how you want it to act like a chatbot.
Okay, no, very good. Somewhat related, the next question would be for practical use of it. How does it or does it necessarily maintain consistency in response? In the sense that if I ask the same question at two different points in time, will it go and create two different sets of answer, which I have found it does. That's the whole probability structure and everything. But for certain things, I think the consistency will be important. Let's say, for example, if somebody is trying to write a code, and there could be information on code that works, and there could be information on code that doesn't work or take more time and resource. Does it have intelligence to choose between the two and maintain some kind of consistency?
Yeah, so you're precisely right that because of the way that it's probabilistically sampling from the vocabulary, each time you prompt it with something, you're likely to get a variant on what it outputs. So that can be a problem for detecting AI generations. So as a professor, we will often run our students' essay submissions through a plagiarism detection to check, like, are they strongly overlapping with other students in the course or previous semesters or things that are available online? But of course, if they were running it through a system like GPT, it's generating an entirely unique thing each time they press generate. So there's a bunch of different ways. So that has a negative connotation there. In terms of consistency, I think language is diverse, so you can often have different ways of saying things that are all equally good. So I think it's not necessarily the case that different variants are necessarily better or worse. So oftentimes the way that you can control it to be better is to add additional context, which it uses to produce the generation. So I think giving AI an introduction to yourself. So like as you're using it, you say who you are, what your job is, what venue you're writing your document for. Like that'll often produce a generation that's much higher and more consistent with what you imagine it ought to be producing.
Oh, wonderful. No, thank you so much. And also, I think the audience wanted to give you a task for next time you come back with some salsa music as well, please.
Absolutely.
All
Thank
right.
you, everyone.
With that, we move on to Patrick. Patrick Hall is from George Washington University, and he's going to talk about National Institute of Standard and Technology, guidance and managing risk of AI and generative AI. Patrick, over to you.
I think Chris got the fun presentation and I got the boring presentation, but that's okay. It's exciting to me, I guess. So my goal is to give you the shortest possible overview of the very sophisticated NIST AI risk management framework. First, I have to say, it's a Department of Commerce framework. I am not a government official. I do not speak for NIST in any way. My affiliation with the AI risk management framework is that I've been a grantee doing research to support the framework basically since its inception, but I cannot possibly speak for NIST. I'm not a government official. Okay. So what is the NIST AI risk management framework? To piggyback off of some of Chris's comments, you may remember last fall, the Biden administration, passed down this executive order about AI. And a lot of that actually referred back to the NIST AI risk management framework. And some of what I'll talk about at the end of the presentation is the work we've been doing around generative AI, sort of at the behest of that executive order. But dating back to 2020, powerful government entities in Congress and in the executive branch were interested in forming authoritative official guidance around the use of AI in the economy. And much like was done for information security and later data privacy, and now artificial intelligence. That task was mostly assigned to NIST, National Institutes for Standards and Technology. And so the AI RMF is relatively young, especially compared to the security and privacy frameworks, but it is basically, in its most basic conception, it's just documents and websites. So what is the NIST AI RMF? Well, one of the most basic ways to explain it is it's just documents and websites that you can read with good information about how to manage risk and increase trustworthiness in AI systems. It's composed of the core sort of policy framework. There's a playbook with sort of lower level and technical implementation information. There's volumes of research with sort of even more in-depth technical information about various aspects of AI systems like explainability and interpretability or bias. And then we are, working as fast as possible to get generative AI guidance out the door. Crucially, and I'm sure many of you in the audience understand this, but I just want to reiterate because I think it's often misunderstood. NIST is not a regulator, and the AI RMF is not regulation. It's currently it's fully voluntary, except for some aspects of the federal government, according to that AI executive order that came out last fall. So some people in the government or some agencies in the government do have some increased expectations of adherence to the AI RMF, but generally out in the commercial world, this is fully voluntary. Other important things about the AI RMF is that it is vertical agnostic, meaning that we don't focus on banking or consumer finance. I'll talk about profiles, which are the mechanism to develop vertical specific risk management guidance. I'll talk about that in just a minute. And another really important thing about the AI RMF, and I think that this term honestly throws some people off, but I think that many of those people actually like what it means, is that the AI RMF is socio-technical. It takes a socio-technical systems approach. We seek to jointly optimize outcomes for technology and for the humans and communities around that technology. And basically what that means is we are focused on outcomes. And I think there's some mistranslation there, because most of the banking risk management officers I know are also highly focused on outcomes. So socio-technical is maybe another way to say we're really focused on real world outcomes and less so on sort of technical risk. The AI RMF is also meant to be rights preserving. I take a more skeptical view to the capabilities of today's AI systems than some. But one thing I'm convinced of is AI is very good at surveillance and it's very good at disinformation. And both of those cause serious issues with our democratic institutions. And the AI RMF, much like the EU AI Act, was one answer to the sort of risk that the AI systems pose to our democratic institutions. Since the AI RMF is voluntary, it's flexibly applied. You can think of it like an AI risk management buffet. You can take what you want and leave what you don't, or maybe said better, take what works for your organization and leave what doesn't. And I guess NIST's main thing is measurement. And we've really sought to make measurable or verifiable outcomes for the AI RMF. But this is difficult because while there's tons of data metrics for AI systems, there's very few agreed upon and standardized real world outcome metrics for AI systems. And one thing that NIST is doing to address this is a real world evaluation program called ARIA. And one thing that you can do if you're interested in this is ask your AI vendors if they plan to participate in the NIST ARIA evaluation, which gets at some harms and risk around generation of sort of confidential or sensitive information, bias, and hallucinations or errors in generative AI systems. Okay, so here's that core RMF document. It's just a PDF that you can download from a website. This document is really a policy document. It's not. I don't think engineers would get much out of this document, but I do think sort of policy or governance people inside banks and consumer finance organizations would. It has a definition for AI systems. It has a definition for risk. We really, really, really tried to build off existing model risk management guidance. For my money, SR 11.7 is still the best, most concise, most precise, most battle-tested framework for managing risk in AI that there is. And by the way, the AI RMF would say that as a regulated bank, you should follow your supervisory and regulatory guidance first. So I think for many people in this audience, the AI RMF is a way to bolster or expand technical risk management practices or other risk management practices around AI. You're still supposed to put your ACOA obligations and your supervisory obligations ahead of the AI RMF. And since I expect that many people in this crowd are familiar with model risk management, whereas most other people in the world wouldn't be, I think SR 11.7 is the most cited document across the AI RMF, and that's intentional. Model risk management is one of the few battle-tested risk management frameworks out there, and we wanted to make sure that we hewed close to it as much as was possible. But again, I want to emphasize, in fact, Govern 1.1, one of the subcategories of the AI RMF, says very clearly, the very first subcategory says, you follow the law, you put your legal and supervisory obligations before the NIST AI RMF. Okay. I expect most people in the audience have seen an AI lifecycle, so I'll try not to bore you. What I think is interesting about NIST AI lifecycle is it puts people and planet in the middle. And again, this is our sort of rights preserving and socio-technical focus. The most important thing is AI outcomes for people and AI outcomes in our environment. I think another thing that's important here is that NIST defined this term AI actors, because engineers and developers are just far from the only people that interact and play a role in the AI lifecycle. At this point, me and you, even if I wasn't a machine learning engineer and I was just chatting with ChatGPT sometimes, I'd be an AI actor playing some role in an AI lifecycle. So the AI lifecycle has expanded. AI actors have expanded to include many people that aren't engineers or developers. Okay, some of the main thing, the main thing that the core RMF does is it puts forward 7 desirable characteristics for trustworthy systems or trustworthiness in systems, and then it puts forward 4 functions for managing risk. Okay, so these are the things that we've decided through a lot of consultation and public feedback. These are the main desirable characteristics for making an AI system trustworthy. I think you can read these as well as I can, and they're fairly self-explanatory, but I'll just try to call out some highlights. There's no such thing as an AI system without bias, or at least we're not aware of one. And we're not really aware of a way to achieve that either. So I think, one red flag for me when I'm interacting with AI vendors or, supposed AI experts is when they say things like all bias has been eliminated. That's simply an impossibility. Valid and reliable is a huge issue with AI systems in my opinion. While some of the top of the line systems have good scientific underpinnings, some very famous AI systems have very flawed scientific underpinnings. And many AI systems struggle with reliability. They struggle to behave as intended within certain parameters for a certain amount of time. And so scientific validity and overall reliability, those are really key factors in AI systems. And then accountable and transparent. So what we mean there is sort of meaningful transparency, not can I explain every decision that an AI system makes, but do I understand basically how it works? Do I understand if there's a problem, who I can talk to? Try that with your social media algorithms. Do I understand the intended purpose and how I can know if I'm using the system for its intended purpose or not? So accountable and transparent really gets at high level, meaningful transparency and human accountability for AI decisions. I think I could stay here and talk forever. And the last thing I'll say is that NIST did a lot of research into sort of cognition of information from AI systems and came up with what I think are the best definitions for explainable and interpretable. And I'll show that paper in just a few moments. Okay, so we have those 7 things that we want AI systems to be. How do we get there? 4 organizational functions: governance, mapping, measuring, and managing. So I think everybody, or this is an audience where people are more likely to understand what governance is than other places where I might speak, I guess. But what we mean by governance is that senior level executives understand what's happening with AI in the company, that there would be a clear line of command and communication from those senior executives, even down to the engineers who are typing the code or testing the code, that there would be written, transparent policies and procedures about an organization's use of AI so that everyone would know what the rules are and could follow them and could get in trouble if they don't. Documentation is incredibly boring, but incredibly important for governance, because a lot of governance boils down to smart people reviewing written arguments and justifications. I'm not convinced that AI can help with that at all and in its current state today, but I'm sure there may be opportunities there. And then as many, again, I think people in this audience understand, and perhaps out in the broader tech industry don't understand, the way you get people to do risk management work is by incentivizing them to do risk management work. Risk management work is tedious and boring oftentimes, and people should be paid and promoted for doing it. Otherwise, they're very unlikely to do it. I think MAP is oftentimes the sort of hardest one to understand because maybe people lump it into governance, and that wouldn't necessarily be wrong. But MAP means we acknowledge the risk and we document them and we put them on the map so that everyone is aware of them. And again, we're more concerned about sort of risk in the outcomes versus like low AUC on test data sets, which, I believe me, I understand that that's supposed to be correlated with bad outcomes, but I think that problems in AI measurement and AI culture mean that a lot of times those kind of test data metrics just don't behave the way they're supposed to. So we're really focused on real world risk. We want to put those on the map and we want to understand and deal with them. Measurement, we need to be able to measure things to improve them. Some things in AI we can measure quantitatively. Some things we have to sort of resort to qualitative documentation and tracking and structured human feedback because we just don't know how to measure them yet. And then, of course, manage is when we do something about the risk. And I think this is familiar to this audience, but we'd want to prioritize the risk because no one has infinite risk management resources, and then decide whether we're going to mitigate or accept. You'll know AI has reached a more mature state when you can buy AI insurance, and I do think that that's sort of in the works, and you could transfer some of your AI risk. But I think the basic idea, the basic sort of possibilities today with management are mitigation or acceptance, and then sort of being careful about your residual risk. Okay, I want to leave time for questions. Playbook is where you go for deeper information, whether you're sort of interested in policy or technical information. So Playbook is sort of the place to go for deeper information for more traditional aspects of AI and machine learning, not yet generative AI. Here's some of that research I was talking about. I'll call out that this Psychological Foundations of Explainability and Interpretability in AI, I think is one of the best papers written on the subject. This is sort of my area of technical expertise, and I think it's great. I think the bias paper is great. I'm an author on that, so you don't have to trust me. But these are just examples of the sort of research that goes on behind the AI RMF. And they're all publicly available, paid for by your tax dollars. You should read them or have somebody on your team read them. Okay. the AI RMF is just sort of an ongoing government program. There's no real end date. And one thing I like to point out, if you want to get more involved in the AI RMF, NIST is always seeking industry-specific profiles. So this would mean you or someone in your organization sort of follows a specific format that's fairly easy, in my opinion. It's really like spreadsheet writing to define guidance aligned to the AI RMF in your vertical. So in banking or consumer finance or fintech, whatever you consider your vertical to be, you could write a profile, and if it's good, then NIST would like to host it on the website and sort of share it with others. And you can show off your adherence and knowledge in AI risk management. You could also just do it internally, as sort of a AI risk management muscle building exercise if that was of interest. But I always like to call it the profiles. Really quickly, tons of work is being done on generative AI. I think I have something like 4 papers cooking on this that are meant to come out over the summer and into the fall. The one thing that's come out so far is the generative AI risk profile. So the only piece of guidance or the primary piece of guidance to come out to date for generative AI is this AI risk management profile for generative AI, where we defined 12 risk for generative AI and also put forward some controls and actions for risk management that primarily relate to content provenance or watermarking, governance, incident disclosure, and pre-deployment testing. Okay, so the big take-home message here is that a lot of the generative AI guidance is still pending. The one document that's come out is this generative AI risk profile. It defines 12 risk, which I think are really helpful for sort of thinking of the universe of risk and risk tiering exercises for generative AI. If you're sitting at your bank and wondering how we're going to make risk tiers or how can I validate my risk tiers for generative AI, go here. The actions are similar to controls, and so this comes with sort of a control library that you could consider reading through, taking the pieces that work for you in terms of actually formalizing some risk controls for generative AI. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to go back to the slide with the risk as food for thought, and happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Patrick. We have a number of questions. So let me start with the first one regarding the standard and on all that. How does it? What is the approach towards a global international standard? Because everybody is exposed to the international, information. How is it done across the world, and especially how do we protect our citizens from harm from another country?
Okay, actually, that is a great question. So I will give a weak answer to that, which is what I'm aware of is on the AI risk management team at NIST, there are people who focus on sort of unification with ISO, International Standards Organization, and the EU AI Act, OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So NIST sort of has good processes for unifying their guidance or aligning their guidance to other important international standards. But I really think my personal opinion is we sort of live in the Wild West days of AI, and bad things can and will happen, right? And I don't think that I'm not sure, unfortunately, that we're set up to prevent those things very well. I do know that CISA, the cybersecurity agency in the federal government, is working very, very hard on sort of AI guidance and getting AI security risk under control. But I'm not sure I'm qualified to speak on that subject beyond that. And I do, it's something that I worry about myself. A lot of very powerful tools have been put out into the world with not so much thought about the bad things that might happen.
Obviously, we expect to see more, evolution in that field, in that area. The next question, if I can move to, you talked about measuring risk, And you talked about measuring risk where there is specific metrics. And also you talked about non-numerical risk like video recommendation. Would you just give us some example of like what is a measure for situations like where there is no metric? And
yeah
some example will help.
It's not a fun answer. It's a hard answer. The answer is you have to do science. The answer is you have to structure experiments. And I don't think NIST is naive enough to think that even most banks will be able to sort of set up structured experiments to measure risk that are difficult to quantify. And that's why NIST is doing this ARIA. ARIA is ARIA. That's why NIST is doing this ARIA evaluation to sort of really get started in this field of sort of measuring real world AI outcomes. And we're really just doing old fashioned structured experiments with randomization and blinding, and having vendors sort of state what their hypothesis is, and then doing an experiment with human subjects to see if that outcome is observed with statistical significance. So the setup is almost something like a drug trial for AI systems. DeepMind has done some similar work. The DoD is definitely doing similar work. But I would say that measurement of AI outcomes in the real world is really in its infancy, and it's only going to be organizations like NIST and the DoD that do the sort of structured experiments that are needed to kind of form the basis of that science. And we'd love it if banks were willing to put their resources in that direction, but I'm not naive enough to think that a whole lot of that will be done. I do think it would be smart of banks to do a lot of user research, a lot of product management, a lot of focus groups around human interactions with AI systems. So I do think that's realistic.
Okay. Moving along with that, and again, some amount of evaluation and so forth. What is the industry common practice to evaluate large language model performance risk for use cases when there is no ground truth?
Right. So there's all these benchmarks, and famously, the president of OpenAI said evals are oftentimes all you need. Where evals refers to sort of a benchmark, a suite of benchmarks that may measure things like common sense reasoning or bias or sort of language comprehension. So there's just hundreds, if not thousands, of different sort of benchmarks that can be run on these AI systems. I just want to be clear, though, that you should run these benchmarks, but you should take a critical eye to them. I mean, some of the benchmarks are based on sort of classifications of other ML ratings from other ML classifiers that could easily be wrong. And then moreover, these benchmarks just aren't going to measure risk in human AI configuration. They're not going to measure supply chain risk. They're not going to measure things that are outside the computer, right? And I think that's where we really want to. The risk is outside the computer. Okay, the main risks are outside the computer. These benchmarks measure things inside the computer, and so I would question their utility and this kind of preposterous statement that evals are all you need in terms of doing risk management and consumer finance. But the standard is evals. So just Google evals and you'll find a million GitHubs, and you should run some of those tests. But you should also take a critical eye towards them. It's my opinion.
I see. Although we are top of the hour and we are just going for a break, I think I'll probably want to ask a last question regarding. You talked about the bias cannot be eliminated, which we intuitively obviously understand, but just curious if there is any kind of standard way of measurement of bias. If there is a quantification of that,
Yeah. There are quantification standards. I'm going to pull this quote straight from the NIST document, so you guys so you don't blame me. So this is in an intro of one of the bias guidance that I showed, which I do think is excellent. And if you're wondering how to measure bias in an AI system in a bank for risk management purposes, I do think you should read NIST SP 1270. Okay, so getting to this notion of, are there standards? Yes. So anybody that works in fair lending or employment can tell you that there are strong standards, right? There are known tests. They're pretty simple. They're pretty rudimentary, but they work well for supervised machine learning. So things like the adverse impact ratio, standardized mean difference, or Cohen's d, marginal effects. These are measurements that have been used for decades in consumer finance and employment decision making, and have sort of a whole body of legal thresholds and standards around them. So if you're doing supervised machine learning, a lot of time is wasted on sort of silly metrics that data scientists have put forth in the last couple of years that I would say are questionable from a scientific and legal perspective. If you're in a bank, you want to do the testing of the metrics with legal precedence first, okay? Or if you're in the employment, the HR part of the bank, and most of the people who do that would know that. Now, for generative AI, it is harder. There are less standards, and the standards that do exist. Well, let's not say any standards exist. Let's say some norms are starting to be built up around the benchmarks. There are benchmarks in eval for different kinds of bias, representativeness bias, stereotype bias, denigration bias, and there is also red teaming. And so red teaming would be another sort of industry norm where, and this is essentially where you bring in smart people to try to trick the model into saying nasty things to establish to establish sort of worst case bounds for how the system might behave in the worst cases. So in generative AI right now, most people measure bias with these benchmarks or evals. You should also be doing some red teaming, some human sort of adversarial messing with the models to understand the worst case scenarios. And then if you really want to understand what's going to happen in the real world, you need to be doing those user studies, UI, UX design studies, focus groups, those types of things. And then I guess NIST and DoD will be running these sort of these sort of human subjects experiments to understand significant treatment effects from generative AI systems in the real world, including those related to bias. So, I would say for supervised machine learning and regulated contexts, yes, there are somewhat clear standards. For generative AI, we're just getting started. It's model testing, red teaming, and structured experiments.
Thank you so much.